Take a look at this artifact. Before you is a gold octadrach, a coin weighing 27 grams, the heaviest and most valuable in the entire history of antiquity. Frozen on the obverse is a profile wearing a royal diadem and a veil. The woman grips a scepter, the symbol of absolute power, and a cornucopia. This is the story of Arsinoe II, the woman who achieved the impossible. In a brutal era when the daughters of kings served merely as bargaining chips in dynastic marriages, remaining silent prizes for the victors, she refused to be a pawn. Arsinoe became a player, one who flips the board entirely. She wore the crowns of three of the greatest states of the Hellenistic world: harsh Thrace, warlike Macedonia, and incredibly wealthy Egypt. 3 times fate cast her down to the very bottom, taking away her husbands, her homes, and even her children. But every single time, this queen rose from the ashes, returning even more ruthless and powerful than before. We are accustomed to perceiving Egypt's golden age through the prism of her brother and husband, Ptolemy II Philadelphus. Previously, we observed him as a brilliant intellectual who built the Pharos Lighthouse and the Great Library, a ruler who preferred scrolls to swords. However, behind the shine of Alexandrian marble hid a different, far darker truth. Every mind must have a will, and if Ptolemy II acted as the brain of the empire, then Arsinoe transformed into its steel spine. Before you will unfold the path not just of a king's sister, but of a de facto co-ruler whose cold fury forged the greatness of a superpower. You will learn how a mother who saw her children murdered before her eyes found the strength not just to survive, but to seize power in a foreign land. It is time to dissect how she forced proud Greeks and Macedonians to worship her as a living goddess, stepping over the most ancient taboos of humanity. This is not a fairy tale about love. This is a chronicle of extreme political survival, where the stakes are immortality. Let's reveal the cards. 300 BC, the harsh shores of Thrace. Imagine a 16-year-old girl from sunny Alexandria. Her father, Ptolemy I, sends her north as living political collateral. Arsinoe arrives to wed King Lysimachus. This bodyguard of Alexander is already 60. Before her stands a man mountain, whose body is crisscrossed with scars and whose character has been hardened in decades of continuous slaughter. The union had no romantic goals, embodying the dry calculation of 2 dynasties. But the young Egyptian girl didn't just enter a stranger's house. She walked into a cage of predators. Reigning at Lysimachus's court was his eldest son and heir, Agathocles, a brilliant warrior, idol of the army, and the hope of Macedonia. Arsinoe realized the status of second wife would turn her and her future offspring into defenseless targets for the ambitious prince. She bore Lysimachus 3 sons, and with the first cry of her firstborn, a countdown timer began. The mathematics of Diadochi survival was frightening in its simplicity. As soon as the old monarch closed his eyes, Agathocles would liquidate the competition. In this world, half-brothers don't share toys, they fight for the right to breathe. The moment of Arsinoe's first transformation arrives. Instead of awaiting the fate of a victim, she launches a preemptive strike. Traditional history brands her a wicked stepmother, but let's try to view the situation through the eyes of a pragmatist. Having no army of her own, the queen uses the only weapon available: access to the suspicious husband's ear. A virtuoso psychological game begins. Instead of open accusations, the Egyptian sows doubt. Every victory of Agathocles, every enthusiastic cheer of the soldiers is presented to old Lysimachus as a harbinger of a coup. She masterfully strikes the dictator's sorest spot, the fear that the young wolves are ready to tear the alpha apart. The climax comes in 284 BC. Lysimachus's paranoia, inflamed by his wife's intrigues, reaches its limit. Believing in a conspiracy by his own son, the king gives the order. Agathocles, the hope of the state, is thrown into a dungeon and poisoned. Arsinoe celebrates victory. It seems the path to the throne for her sons is cleared. However, this success collapsed the very foundation of the empire, instantly turning protected heirs into potential exiles in an ocean of chaos. The execution of the people's favorite blew the country apart. Cities revolted, commanders defected to the enemy. Deprived of his main support in the form of his son, Lysimachus found himself defenseless. The old predator died in the Battle of Corrupium against Seleucus. Arsinoe was left a widow amidst the ruins. She had passed the school of predators and eliminated the threat, but found herself trapped in Cassandreia. She was surrounded by people who hated the Egyptian witch who had destroyed their prince. And approaching the city gates was a new calamity, far more terrible than any regular army. Winter, 280 BC. Arsinoe is languishing in Cassandreia, the most powerful fortress in the northern Aegean Sea. The city walls seem impregnable, but time is working against her. Chaos rages all around, born from the disintegration of Lysimachus's empire. And at the gates, the army of a man she has known since childhood is lined up. It is Ptolemy Ceraunus, her half-brother. The very thunderbolt who betrayed all his patrons and recently personally stabbed the elderly Seleucus Nicator to steal the Macedonian throne. Now he has come for her, or rather, for the legitimacy embodied by Lysimachus's widow and the mother of his heirs. Instead of storming the walls, the cynic Ceraunus offers an alliance. He asks for Arsinoe's hand in marriage. Appreciate the monstrous irony. The murderer of her husband and the usurper of her home promises her the title of Queen of Macedonia for the sake of protecting her children. Arsinoe freezes before the most terrible choice of her life. On one side, siege, starvation, and inevitable captivity. On the other, marriage to a man whose hands are bloodied to the elbows. But the woman is driven by ambition. She sees a chance in this. If she accepts the proposal, her eldest son, Ptolemy, will become the official heir to the throne. The queen believes she can outplay her brother, just as she once outplayed Agathocles. Ceraunus strikes at the weakest point. He swears by all the gods of Olympus. He performs sacrifices, publicly swearing to Zeus that he will adopt Arsinoe's children and share power with them. Usually astute and cold, she makes a fatal mistake. Maternal hopes drown out the instinct of self-preservation. She trusts not the brother, but the sacred contract of the crown. Arsinoe orders the gates of Cassandreia to be opened. This day was supposed to be a triumph. The city is drowning in garlands, and the people rejoice, welcoming the unification of dynasties. The air is thick with the scent of incense and a deceptive sense of peace, an anticipation of calm destined to turn into a nightmare. Arsinoe personally meets Ceraunus, placing a golden wreath on his head. She lets the wolf into the sheepfold, confident she holds him on a leash. But as soon as the heavy gate doors slam shut behind the royal guard, the masks fall to the floor. Ceraunus strikes not simply out of cruelty. He had been informed that Arsinoe herself was weaving a plot, planning to use the wedding as a trap. For him, this is an act of preemptive self-defense. The scene that followed forever changed Arsinoe. Her two younger sons, 16-year-old Lysimachus and 13-year-old Philip, come to meet their stepfather in ceremonial robes. The eldest, Ptolemy, sensing trouble, managed to flee, but the younger remained in the trap. A brief gesture of Ceraunus turns the ceremony into a slaughter. The soldiers don't just seize the boys, they begin the massacre right in the palace halls. Maddened with terror, the children run to their only protector, to their mother. Look at this scene. Arsinoe, daughter of Ptolemy Soter, presses her sons to herself, trying to cover them with her own body against the spears. She, who decided the fates of empires, is reduced to the state of a cornered victim. Ceraunus's mercenaries drive their blades through her arms, through the fabric of her dress. They kill the children on her breast, soaking the royal chiton in scarlet blood. Ceraunus watches indifferently. He is removing potential usurpers. The competitors are dead. The fortress is taken. The rest matters not to him. The humiliation continues. Death would have been a merciful outcome, but Ceraunus denies her sister even that. He tears the bloodied robes from her, leaving her in a simple tunic, and throws her out beyond the city walls. She is forbidden even to mourn and bury her sons. Yesterday's ruler of the north wanders towards the exit, accompanied by two handmaidens, under the cackling of soldiers who had just butchered her family. It wasn't just a broken woman who walked out of the gates of Cassandreia. There, Arsinoe the human died, the one who believed in oaths and kinship. In that hour, Arsinoe the goddess was born, a being without fear, pity, or illusions. She realized the truth of Hellenism. Safety is guaranteed only by absolute, undivided power. The refugee headed for the island of Samothrace, to the sanctuary of the great gods, but her gaze was already turned south, towards the place where her full brother, Ptolemy II, ruled, towards where the last chance ripens to take revenge on the world that took everything from her. Alexandria, 279 BC. Into the famous harbor, illuminated by the fire of the Pharos lighthouse, sails a merchant ship bearing no royal insignia. A woman, wrapped in a travel cloak, descends the gangway. Arsinoe returns home. But this is not the triumphant return of the prodigal daughter. Before us is the arrival of a political ghost. She is 37 years old. By the standards of antiquity, this is the age of twilight. Behind the princess lie two dead husbands, the lost crowns of Thrace and Macedonia, and, most terrifyingly, the fresh graves of her sons. In the eyes of the Alexandrian nobility, she is reputed to be a walking disaster, a living reminder of how empires collapse. It would seem the woman is destined for the role of an honorary widow living on her brother's charity, quietly aging in the remote chambers of the palace and mourning her past. But those who thought so made a fatal mistake. The surrounding people saw a victim, but overlooked the predator. Arsinoe did not return for sanctuary. She returned to take revenge on fate. The palace situation was a stalemate. The throne of the Queen of Egypt was firmly held by her namesake and stepdaughter, Arsinoe I, the daughter of Lysimachus, the heroine's first husband. A young, fertile woman who had borne Ptolemy II 3 healthy children, including an heir. By all laws of logic and tradition, the seat is securely occupied. The refugee has practically no chance. However, the older sister possesses something the young rival lacks, and what Ptolemy himself is sorely missing: experience in surviving hell. Here begins the most subtle and cynical part of her plan. Arsinoe refrains from open attack
and does not weave primitive intrigues with poison. She begins an intellectual siege of her brother's mind. Ptolemy II was reputed to be a brilliant administrator, a refined diplomat, a man of science, but he was not seen as a warrior. The king feared brute force, wars, and the conspiracies of his own Macedonian generals, who looked upon the bookworm with disdain. The ruler felt lonely at the summit of power. Arsinoe finds the vulnerability and hits exactly on target. The princess becomes not just a sister to her brother, but that very unshakable support he lacked. She speaks to him in the language of realpolitik, learned in the camps of the Diadochi. If he sees a diplomatic problem, the sister finds an opportunity to strike. Where he hesitates, she offers a solution. The woman becomes his shadow, his chief advisor, his alter ego. She sells him the most expensive thing in politics: absolute trust. Your generals may betray. Your wife thinks of the future of her children, not yours. Only I, your flesh and blood, am devoted to you to the end, because without you, I am nothing. The culmination of this quiet war arrives around 276 BC. The Alexandrian court is shaken by a scandal. Queen Arsinoe I, mother of the heirs, is suddenly accused of a conspiracy against the king's life. Evidence appears as if out of thin air. Is she actually guilty? Historians doubt it, but the handwriting of the prosecution betrays a master of intrigue. This is not the rough work of soldiers, but a surgical operation to remove a competitor. The suspicious Ptolemy, frightened by the prospect of a coup, makes a decision instantly. The rival is not executed. That would cause public outrage. She is destined for a fate worse than death. Arsinoe I is exiled to Koptos, into the scorching sands of Upper Egypt. Imagine the contrast. Yesterday she walked through the cool gardens of Alexandria, surrounded by a retinue. And today the exile stares at the endless desert, stripped of her name, title, and children. Archaeologists found a stele there on which, in despair, she still styles herself king's wife, unable to accept the reality of her fall. The path is clear. Arsinoe eliminated the competitor without spilling a drop of her own blood. She took the place beside her brother, not as a poor relative, but as an indispensable co-ruler. But ambition demands more. The role of gray eminence does not suit her. A crown is necessary. She needs sacred legitimacy that will make her untouchable. And then a plan is born in her mind that will make the entire Greek world shudder. A design that violates the fundamental laws of human morality for the sake of absolute power.
By 273 BCE, Arsinoe had achieved the unthinkable. A former exile in rags, she had swept all competitors out of the Alexandrian palace. The legitimate wife was sent by the king into the desert. The nephews were stripped of rights, and the king himself relied entirely on his sister's advice. It would seem a triumph, but Arsinoe, having passed through the harsh school the Diadochi, possessed an instinct for hidden threats. She understood the status of beloved sister is quicksand. As long as Ptolemy II remains a bachelor, he attracts gazes in the dynastic market. Sooner or later, he will be offered a princess from Syria, Macedonia, or Epirus. And this new queen will bring with her a whole retinue, brothers, uncles, and advisors who will inevitably try to eliminate the husband's influential relative. Arsinoe remembered the lesson of Cassandreia. Any outsider carries the poison of betrayal. Ptolemy Ceraunus, having become a stranger to Lysimachus, destroyed his family. To survive, Arsinoe sought to make power absolutely hermetic, closing the internal circuit.
The only way out seemed to be a union with her own brother. But in the Hellenistic world, bound by taboos, such a thing was considered agus, a pollution for which the gods punish with plague. Greeks forgave kings their mistresses, but marriage to a sister challenged the very foundations of human existence. Arsinoe faced a choice: hide in the shadows and wait for a rival to appear, or take a leap into the abyss, stepping over the laws of men for the survival of the dynasty. The only way to make power inviolable was a step that the Greeks called madness. The decision was made, and Alexandria shuddered. The announcement of the marriage of Ptolemy and Arsinoe caused not affection, but shock and disgust. Loudest of all to express this protest was the poet Sotades. Previously, we mentioned his execution as an act of censorship, but it is worth looking at this through the eyes of Arsinoe herself. To her, Sotades' verses did not seem merely biting satire. The famous line, "Thou thrustest thy sword into an unholy scabbard," struck not at the king's vanity, it aimed personally at her. Sotades branded her body an unclean place, a source of curses for the whole people. Arsinoe instantly assessed the danger. If the mob is allowed to mock the queen as a pervert, her authority will collapse. Laughter kills fear, and without fear, submission is impossible. While Ptolemy perhaps wavered under the pressure of intellectuals, Arsinoe acted with the icy resolve of a predator. It was her fury, most likely, that signed the poet's death warrant. The lead chest in which Sotades was thrown into the sea laid the foundation of her renewed throne. She demonstrated to the elite, this marriage is not up for discussion, it is accepted as a given. Either you acknowledge the new reality, or you disappear into the abyss. The silence that reigned in the city after the execution meant not agreement, but submission before a power that had rejected all prohibitions. But one cannot build an empire on intimidation alone. Arsinoe required something more, legitimacy standing above human morality. And here, her genius as a political strategist manifested itself. She refused to offer excuses and went all in. If people consider this union a sin, then the rulers must cease to be people. She offered her brother the concept of Thei Adelphoi, the sibling gods. The elegance of this strategy is striking. For native Egyptians, whom the Macedonian nobility despised, but who made up the majority, the marriage of brother and sister symbolized a sacred imitation of Isis and Osiris. With this gesture, Arsinoe turned a foreign dynasty into true pharaohs, receiving unconditional support of the priesthood. And for the Greeks, she played the card of hieros gamos, the sacred marriage of Zeus and Hera. She proclaimed, "We do not obey your laws, for we are equal to the Olympians." This maneuver made the power of the Ptolemies unreachable for intrigues. No more sons-in-law or fathers-in-law claiming a piece of the pie. The family turned into a sealed fortress. Arsinoe gained what she strove for, absolute security. Having become a goddess in life, she rose to a height inaccessible to criticism. From now on, she acted not simply as a spouse, she became a full-fledged co-ruler whose face was minted on coins on equal footing with the king. Inside Egypt, Arsinoe became a living goddess, untouchable and omnipotent. But her gaze was fixed beyond the horizon. There, across the sea, lay Macedonia, the land that had destroyed her first husband and children, the country where the Antigonids now ruled. Having become the mistress of Egypt, Arsinoe did not forget old grievances. She required not only safety, she required vengeance, and she planned to throw all the might of Egyptian gold and naval power to set Greece on fire and crush those who had robbed her of her past.
Alexandria, 268 BC. Within the golden cage of Egypt, Arsinoe had achieved absolute triumph. She had transformed into a living goddess, a co-ruler, a woman whose name was whispered with reverence from Nubia to Syria. But if you think divine status made her settle down and dedicate herself to feasts, you have learned the lesson of her life poorly. In her soul remained a deep, unhealing wound, and its name was Macedonia. Look at the map through Arsinoe's eyes. There, in the north, rules Antigonus Gonatas. He occupies the very throne that by rights belonged to her children. Macedonia, for her, is not just a neighboring state. It is a cursed place, a graveyard of hopes, a country that swallowed her first husband and drank the blood of her sons. The status of Queen of Egypt is not enough for Arsinoe. She needs to crush the enemy's power. She requires a vendetta, and for this, she is ready to set all of Greece on fire. Here lies the abyss between brother and sister. Ptolemy II usually preferred to buy peace. He showed caution, avoiding direct clashes. Arsinoe, however, acted as a true hawk. The queen realized, as long as Macedonia is strong, Egypt will not be the master of the Mediterranean. She convinces her brother that a collision is inevitable, but it will not be Egyptian soldiers spilling blood for Ptolemy's interests, but proud Greeks. Chests of gold are sent to Athens, not phalanxes. Arsinoe initiates the creation of a grand coalition. She skillfully manipulates the Greeks' love for freedom. Athens and Sparta, eternal rivals, unite against Antigonus Gonatas, fed by Egyptian money. Thus is laid the foundation of the conflict that will go down in history as the Chremonidean War. However, one detail betrays the true architect of this storm. In Athens, the Chremonides decree was found, a stela proclaiming the alliance. The text of the document, carved in stone, states the alliance is concluded following the policy of King Ptolemy and Queen Arsinoe. Think about it. In the patriarchal world of antiquity, where women were not admitted to military councils, the Athenian demos officially acknowledges the war was prepared by the will of a woman. This is an unprecedented case, the author's signature beneath a bloody canvas. Arsinoe does not limit herself to the role of muse. In the last years of her life, she personally inspects shipyards, checking the readiness of combat triremes. She tries on the image of Athena Promachos, the champion in the front line, turning the Egyptian fleet into an instrument of personal retribution. The strategy was simple: economic and military strangulation of Macedonia by foreign hands. Antigonus Gonatas was to bleed out, fighting Greek rebels under a blockade of ships that she built. Her political influence reaches its zenith. The Exile, who once fled Macedonia in rags, now dictates the fate of entire nations with a wave of her hand. She turned revenge into a cold calculation cast in gold, but she was destined not to see the fruits of her design. For this triumph, she had to pay the ultimate price, her own life that burned out in the flames of this indomitable energy. The Chremonidean War became her personal chess game, but the pieces on the board began to move only after her death, executing the queen's posthumous will. The war with Macedonia consumed resources that even the fertile Nile lands could not provide. Ptolemaic Egypt was not just a river civilization, it was a thalassocracy, a rule of the sea. The stability of the empire rested on the wooden decks of 300 combat galleys and thousands of grain merchant vessels. However, sailors, superstitious people living on the edge of the elements, revered their own pantheon, Poseidon, the Dioscuri, ancient lords of the deep. Arsinoe realized, to control the empire, it was not enough to own the treasury and the army.
It was necessary to subdue the fears and hopes of those who gripped the oars. She had to rise above the status of a queen, transforming into a deity, ruling over calm and storm. The fleet needed sacred patronage. The queen takes a step that turns religion into an instrument of naval dominance. Her loyal admiral, Callicrates of Samos, erects a temple on Cape Zephyrium, east of Alexandria. But the walls of this sanctuary are dedicated not to Isis or Hera. Here, the cult of Arsinoe Aphrodite is born. The image of the Greek goddess of love merges with the persona of the ruler, creating a new entity, Arsinoe Euploia, giver of good sailing. This psychological calculation proved flawless. Now, every captain leaving the Alexandrian harbor saw not just a landmark, but the abode of his mistress. The veneration of Arsinoe entered maritime custom. She tied the loyalty of the fleet not to an abstract state, but to her own person. Admirals won victories no longer for the glory of Egypt, but for the glory of Arsinoe the victorious. She turned into the living talisman of the most powerful military machine in the Mediterranean, a woman whose face on a coin guaranteed a safe return to one's native doorstep. However, maintaining the cult required a colossal gold reserve. And here, Arsinoe demonstrates a financial grip capable of staggering the imagination of any state treasurer. In Egypt, there existed an ancient tax, the apamoira. Previously, a sixth of the harvest from orchards and vineyards had gone for centuries to the disposal of local priests. These enormous funds made the temples independent and politically dangerous. Arsinoe and Ptolemy rewrite legal norms with the stroke of the pen. From now on, the apamoira is directed not to the sanctuaries of Ptah or Amun, but enters the disposal of the cult of Arsinoe Philadelphus. Note the subtlety of this reform. The queen did not rob the gods. Such sacrilege would have provoked a rebellion. She officially recognized herself as a deity to whom financial flows logically shifted. Such a maneuver allowed achieving two goals at once. It undermined the economic base of the traditional priesthood, forcing them to bow before the throne, and provided the treasury with a continuous flow of silver. Arsinoe turned the veneration of her personality into capital. She proved that divine status in the ancient world is not only sacred prestige, but also the most effective mechanism for concentrating resources. Power, religion, and finance intertwined into a single knot in the hands of a woman who once left Macedonia with only a chiton on her shoulders. Somewhere between 270 and 268 BC, the unthinkable happens. The Iron Lady of Egypt departs from life. Despite endless energy, years of fierce political struggle, and the colossal burden of responsibility undermined her strength. She died of natural causes, simply burning out at work for the sake of the empire she created. For the king, this is not just the loss of a spouse or sister. He loses his navigator. Ptolemy II, a brilliant intellectual, remains alone at the helm of the huge machine they built together. Ancient chronicles paint a picture of the deepest despair. But it is in this grief that the final, most powerful proof of her power manifests. Ptolemy does not seek a new wife. He does not even consider a replacement. Instead, he decides, if she cannot remain a living queen, she will become an eternal goddess, the likes of which history has never known. The king launches the flywheel of total deification. A decree captured on the Mendes stele states, a statue of Arsinoe II must stand in every temple of Egypt. She transforms into Sinaus Theos, the goddess sharing the temple. Realize the scale of this step. In the Holy of Holies of the most ancient sanctuaries of Ptah, Amun, or Horus, where the foot of a mortal had not stepped for centuries, now towers a golden statue of the Macedonian woman. Those very priests whose income she cut through the apomoira tax are henceforth obliged to perform daily rituals before her. This became the final triumph of political will over age-old tradition. Arsinoe did not just subjugate the country's economy, she occupied its altars. The queen died, but the system she created attained immortality. Ptolemy II survived his sister by 20 years, yet historians often call these years ruling by inertia. He moved strictly according to the charts she had drawn. He finished building the Pharos lighthouse, expanded the library, and completed the wars begun. But that predatory drive she breathed into the dynasty vanished with her. Ptolemy II went into history as a great administrator, but the true architect of his greatness remained the woman whose name he whispered until his last breath. She created the matrix of power, the model of the sister co-ruler, which all queens right up to Cleopatra VII would copy, but no one would succeed in surpassing the original.
Arsinoe II proved to the entire ancient world that a woman can be not merely a bargaining chip in the hands of kings, but a player whose will is capable of flipping the board. She rose from the ashes after the bloody massacre in Cassandreia, where her own children perished before her eyes, to ascend to the unreachable peak of divine greatness in Alexandria and subjugate the richest empire of the Oikoumene. Ptolemy II gave Egypt intellectual brilliance, but it was Arsinoe who forged for him a steel political backbone, turning a loose state into an indestructible monolith. However, in this triumph lay a sinister paradox. Her decision regarding the sacred marriage, intended to protect the crown from outsiders, planted a ticking time bomb under the very foundation of the ruling house. By legitimizing incest, she doomed the Ptolemaic line to centuries of genetic degeneration and madness, which would eventually destroy everything she built. The wheel of history continues to turn, unnoticed of fate's irony. After the departure of the sibling gods, the throne will be inherited not by the flesh and blood of Arsinoe II, but by the son of her main rival, Arsinoe I, the very woman she mercilessly ground into dust and sent to end her days in exile. His name is Ptolemy III Eergetes. In contrast to his philosopher father, this ruler will choose the path of the sword. He will become the last great conqueror of Hellenism, who will challenge the Seleucids and march victoriously all the way to Babylon, striving by force of arms, not the cunning of intrigue, to unite the fractured world of Alexander. His reign is the chronicle of the last dazzling ascent before a long and agonizing sunset. Subscribe to see this zenith of Ptolemaic power. Like the video if Arsinoe's path, from hunted victim to living goddess, made you look at ancient history differently. Write in the comments, who was she to you, an evil genius or the only true architect of the empire? Thanks for watching. See you next time.